Simple chance. That's all that saved us, really. Our ship had been part of a battle group desperately trying to hold off the enemy fleet, long enough to evacuate the civilian population of the system. We didn't dare leave them there. Better to kill them ourselves than leave them to the savagery of the enemy. We didn't know this during our first few engagements with them, to horrifying results. The enemy is of predatory descent, with no compunctions against the enslavement or devouring of sentience. Now I should say my race, the Cockrotitor, are not the strongest of the races in the galaxy, nor are we the weakest. We are an avian race, somewhat known for our curiosity. My name is Leader Gelati, of the warship Flyers with the Sun. Thankfully, the civilian population was only a few thousand, as the colony was only a few decacycles old. It was a trinary star system, with 2 planets and only one of them colonized, the other being studied for some nearly 100,000 cycle-old ruins that were found, including what looked like the remains of a space elevator. The construction, to one of our scientists, had been only hypothetical. There is also evidence that suggests an artificial ring may have once circled this world. Suffice to say, what was left suggests an extremely advanced civilization. Back to what I was saying. The last civilian transport was out, and the battle group was following protocol and jumping away from the system, but not back to our home system directly, as we had discovered in other battles that the enemy somehow had a way to track jumping through higher dimensional space, and we couldn't risk the enemy discovering the location of the home system. I had decided to jump to the next closest system, 4 light cycles away, planning to then jump to one of our last depots next. Once we jumped in the system, our science officer was able to tell from initial scans that the star had been a main sequence yellow star, but was in the process of transitioning to a red giant. There were 7 planets in the system and an asteroid belt, between the 3rd and 4th planets. As we came into the system, something detected us, as warning klaxons started to blare. The tone I instantly recognized as hostiles incoming. Strangely, as quickly as the klaxons started, they stopped. Our ship was hit by a scanner of such unimaginable power that it almost fried the ship's computer. We actually thought it was a form of attack for a moment. Then, a navigational beacon became detectable to us, directing us to the 3rd planet. I'm not sure if it was instinct, curiosity, or just fear of pissing off whoever had scanners, powerful enough to damn near be a weapon in their own right, but I decided to have the ship enter orbit and send a small exploratory crew down. This single action may have saved my race. Normally I would not have gone on an exploratory mission like this, but something deep in my gizzard told me to go. The planet itself was barren, a rusty red in colour, with frozen ice caps at the north and south poles. The navigational beacon led us to land at a cave near the equator. When we landed, the exhaust from our ship cleared off a small portion of a landing pad near the entrance to a cave leading underground. The atmosphere was far too thin to breathe, and no oxygen content to speak of anyways, so we donned pressure suits and headed out. We walked into the cave only a short distance before passing through some kind of energy field. We wouldn't have even realized it, but it caused our feathers to fluff out all at once in our suits. My science officer used his scanner, and to our surprise, after passing through the field, the air was breathable, and the temperature comfortable. We took off our helmets and continued, until we came to a room that was obviously artificial in origin. The moment we walked in, additional scanners activated, and an artificial voice said something we didn't understand, and then everything began to power on. Then appeared before us what we later realized was a hologram. We initially recoiled in horror, because at first glimpse it bore a very striking resemblance to our enemy, being bipedal with 4 limbs, with an upright stance, and the same horrifying binocular vision of a predator. Thankfully, it wasn't covered in fur, and I noticed it stood much straighter than our enemy did. It said something we didn't understand, then appeared to adjust something to its right. I later found out it scanned our ship's computers to obtain our language, and then spoke to us. Well, you're definitely children of terror. Scans confirm that, but not the ones we expected to be contacting us. I'm Jason Enginesmith, xenoanthropologist, he said. I'm sure you have questions. It's probably an ancient AI of some type. Maybe we can get some weapon or shield designs from it to fight the enemy, my science officer said, hopefully. The hologram looked at him, as though he were a child who got an answer on a test wrong. Just as I was about to speak up, my communicator went off. It was my second in command. Sir, there's a ship up here. It just appeared out of nowhere. It's massive. I've never seen anything like it. I'd be willing to bet a whole cycle's pay that is our friend here, I told the science officer dryly. I wouldn't take that bet if I were you. He's right. I'm guessing you're the brains around here, huh? Said the creature in the hologram. Now, why don't you tell me about this enemy? An hour later, on board the UHS Wayfinder. As we sat in the comfortable room on board this massive ship with Jason Enginesmith, who was what I found out was called a human, I had spent the 20 or so millicycles telling him about our several cycle long war with the enemy, and how after repeated attempts they refused to answer any hail, or any message or attempt at diplomacy, which is why we didn't even know what they called themselves. I also told him how we had been holding our own until the last 2 cycles, when the enemy had gotten their hands on some extremely advanced ships out of nowhere. When he asked if I could show him any pictures of them, and obliged, I swear I don't think I have seen many sentients look more sad. Do you recognize them? I asked. Jason nodded, as he turned to a dispenser and got containers with water, and this wonderful honey-flavored seed. After giving us the refreshments, he said, Yeah, I recognize them. I don't know what they're calling themselves now, but we called them chimpanzees. Our mutual home world was in this system. Is now the second world. It was the third, but an ancient enemy of ours was able to accelerate the sun's expansion, and we had to evacuate. By that time, the chimps were in what amounts to the changeover between the Stone Age and the Bronze Age. We didn't feel it was right for their civilization to get snuffed out, just because we made some enemies, so we transplanted them to another world before Earth became uninhabitable, just like we did with your people. Needless to say, me and all of my team were aghast, head crest raised to full extension, which for us is about the same as a human's jaw being on the floor. What do you mean, just like you did with our people? I asked, astonished. That's why your ship wasn't shot down when you approached Mars. The scan confirmed the presence of life descended from Terran life. Your people are the descendants of uplifted birds, namely cockatiels, and macaws that were engineered by a rather eccentric wealthy human, thousands of years ago. I'm not exactly sure on the details, as it was a long damn time ago, and some of our records from that time were lost, but basically every species that had either evolved sentience naturally, or had been uplifted to it artificially, that was present on Earth when we left, was relocated to different worlds. Suffice it to say, I was stunned. I just looked at him for a bit and then asked, They were the ones you're expecting to hear from, aren't they? Not us, nor any of the others you saved. He just looked at me and smiled, somewhat sadly, and said, Yes, you're right. They are the ones we were expecting to hear from. Out of all of the life forms we saved, they were the ones closest related to us genetically. Call it primate bias, I guess. He kinda shrugged. Will you help us again? Like you did our ancestors? I couldn't help but ask, afraid of what his response would be. He looked at me with compassion in his eyes and said, Well, yes. We're not going to abandon you now, especially since this is a mess of our own creation.